you. I'm very honored to be here, and I have been keeping track of the conference remotely. I discovered you can watch it on the airplane now, so pretty cool, huh? I really wanted to come here yesterday, but I'll explain why. But first of all, I'm from Seattle, so that's sort of important to me. But I'm from Seattle when Seattle wasn't cool. There's no coffee or nothing. It wasn't that great. But I grew up like a couple miles away from here in a part of Seattle called the International District. My parents made tofu for a living, which all of you know in 2017, but in the 70s, no one knew what the heck that stuff was. And my mother retired with my father. It was a mom and pop shop, literally. And they retired in the 90s. And my mother was always held on to this video. It was a video where she was on TV in Japan. And she says, "John, this is the family jewels. This is when we were on TV." And so she's always had this VHS tape. And I finally got it converted. And it's like a half-hour-long show, or actually it's an hour-long show. And she's in there for maybe half a minute. So I want to show you, because it's gone now. Never before seen publicly. So this was one of our customers. He always had this strange hat. I didn't know why he wore that hat, but it was kind of cool. And here is the television announcer. And this is it. It was called Star Tofu Manufacturing. It was a little hole in the wall. It was the kind of place that you wonder if it's clean or not. Is it sanitary? But people came from all over to get this tofu because it was the only place where you could get this handmade stuff. Look, a little kid there. Hi, little kid. And what I always was struck by was how happy the customers were. And it's where I learned how when your customer is happy, it's a really good feeling. And one of the traditions in the store was to always open the door for the customer when they're leaving. And so it's something I learned from an early age, is to treat the customer as well as you can. And also make a product that they might want to have. And it's an emotional connection. It's also an irrational connection. And my father was a super taskmaster. You know, he'd make all this stuff. He'd make us make all this stuff. I hated making this stuff as a kid. But my mom was from Hawaii. She's a third-generation Japanese American. And so she's very, very welcoming, talking all the time, you know. And my father would always get a little upset that why is she talking in the front? Tell her to come back, come back, start working. But over time, I realized that the only reason why they came to the store was to talk to my mom. Because she was the customer support line. She was the reason, the warmth that came with this good product. So this combination is something that stuck with me for a long time. Last night, I was at MIT because a dear mentor of mine passed away 15 years ago, named Muriel Cooper, who many people haven't heard of, but I'll talk more about her. But she was the reason why we have computer screens that are beautiful, photographic, typographic. Someone who foresaw a future where computers would actually display things that you actually cared about. This is back in the 70s. No one thought a computer could do anything, but she envisioned this. And so there was a celebration for her. And she was an artist. She was a printmaker by training. And she was very blunt and direct in all of her actions. She was what would be called arrogant, but she was also what you'd be called with conviction. And that conviction enabled her to do things that no one else could ever imagine in anyone's career. And there were hundreds of people there. And it was a wonderful time. And I loved having her as a mentor because she would tell you what she thought. And I don't know if you know it, in modern day times, it's hard to hear what someone really thinks because they're kind of, I don't know if I should say that because they may never talk to me again. But whenever you worked with Muriel, you could feel that she cared about you. And because she cared about you, she could say what she really felt. And if she said something good about you, it was really good. So I loved working with her. And there was this beautiful set of animations put together by Pentagram, which is one of the top design companies in the world. And so you'll see this on the web eventually. These are like private showing of these animations that are going to appear with a book on her life as an artist and a technologist. That was like till like 11 p.m. last night, and then I got up at 4 this morning on East Coast. I drove to the airport, and then I was waiting for WooConf to start again on video. And I was so psyched because JetBlue let me see. I could like watch the conference. It was kind of awesome. So I could listen in, and you know, your neighbors kind of wonder if you're like, what's he doing? But that's okay. It's like 2017. And by the way, it is 2017, so I believe there's this thing called YouTube, so you can always like maybe see me have said something somewhere. So if you want to ask me a question anytime you interrupt me, this is my text number. So just text me a question along the way. So this is very introvert inclusive. And anyone who's far away, right over here, yeah, you can send a question to me, and it all works out okay. So just if you have a question, just ask me a question, and I will stop to address it. Okay. Because it's about value production. Value production is a two-way exchange. So, and then, my gosh, I saw this talk by Becca Rice. This was like, I was just like riveting. And I really got into it. And I enjoyed hearing her talk. And so I was supposed to like finish my talk, but I kept taking notes because I just learned so much, you know? Because she was talking about who was there this morning? Who saw this morning? Okay, so for those who missed it, a little quick summary. Becca was able to frame for us how getting in the customer's shoes is so important. And in absence of that experience, you can't really empathize with what they really need to get done. And you can build something, but you'll build something not really caring about what they need. And she gave different framings for how to care about the customers that you're working with through a case study of a stands company. But one of my favorite sort of moments was remembering something about why big box retailers are dangerous. I used to work with Target and also with other companies that didn't like Target. So you can always get both sides, right? It's good to be on both sides. And I'll never forget, it was a toy company. And the toy company sold cars, toy cars. And so what would happen is every time they would list their toy car set in Target, sure enough, if it did really well, what would happen is Target could easily make their own in-store version of that exact same product, and suddenly you lose the opportunity to sell. So I think that's just a physical big box, but given the digital big box, the threats are quite real. The control is significant, and already we can see different large online retailers using this tactic to be profitable, because they have to. But the people who make these products, who invent them, don't get a chance to fight back. And so I loved how, listening to Becca, I could feel why this room is such an important room, because you're enabling more freedom for more people out there to create things that they care about and to protect them and to feed their families, feed their futures. Now, I found that in every technology company, you talk to anyone in a large technology company, and you ask them to work with customers on a regular basis. And generally speaking, the response is usually, I'm too busy to do that. Anyone sound familiar to anybody who's ever heard this? I'm just too busy. I just can't do that. Do you know how busy I am? I'm really busy. And every company tends to be like this because they are busy. But it's important. And what I loved is going upstairs to the product research lab to see Maria. Come on up, Maria. Come on up, Maria. Applause for Maria, please. Special guest. That's a guest, Maria. So Maria, what is this product research lab?
So this year we had a new experience at WooConf where we set up 3 different research points around the WooCommerce experience. And we also had a few interactive opportunities with the whiteboard, asking for questions and gathering feedback. This put our product teams directly talking to our customers, whether they're developers, agencies, or store merchants themselves.
And I know you have like 3 tips for getting in the customer's shoes.
Yeah, you know, I'm really glad you brought up Becca's talk because it was amazing this morning. But we also heard the same things from Todd, Aviva, even Laura even touched upon it in the talk previous to this. Really just getting out there and talking to the people that are using your product, right? So agencies and developers, they're doing this every day in their needs analysis and understanding what type of site to build. But it doesn't just stop there, right? Because once you build the site, then what? Or once you build that plugin, then what? How are people using it? So talking to them is step 1.
Step 1, talking to them.
But step 2 is seeing how they're actually using it, right? And actually watching them experience that for the first time, seeing what types of challenges they have. This type of process allows for the iteration that's possible to help improve that experience. But the third point that I'd bring up that I think is super important that Becca actually mentioned, and it was such a subtle mention, I don't know if y'all caught it, so I wanted to be sure to call it out. She mentioned that she goes to meetups for merchants. So while we all love that you come to WooConf and we want to encourage you going to WordCamps and talking to WordPress users and going to WordPress meetups, there's tons of merchants all over the world getting together and having their own meetups. And they might not be on WordPress, they might not be on WooCommerce, but they still have the similar challenges that your clients or our customers are facing. So to get out of that bubble and to really kind of hear what that experience is like is really a really valuable experience.
Thank you, Maria. 3 tips. All right. And Maria works in one of my favorite things in the technology universe, Team X, led by Kelly Hoffman over there. So wonderful world. Thank you. All right. So over here, Kelly Hoffman's over there. Thank you, Kelly. Now, this point about customers, why is it so important? It's because I think the ask was just, John, talk about design. Now, I have like all kinds of like models of design, and I have to say I probably have like 30-something of them, but I found the simplest ones. You don't have to search around decades looking for it. It's really simple. And it was framed by a man named Bill Mogridge, who was a dear mentor and friend. He co-founded a company called IDEO. Have you heard of IDEO? 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 Yeah, IDEO. It was a product design company that was able to really corner the market on innovation at scale. And Bill was an amazing gentleman, and he was also the director of the National Design Museum, the Smithsonian's Design Museum. But Bill had this wonderful thing he would say. If there's a simple, easy design principle that binds everything together, it's probably about starting with the people. Which, you think, what does it have to do with design? Well, it has to do with understanding the customer. It has to do with knowing who makes these products. It's understanding who are the people that are connected to these products. Like Laura's point about if you're working with a company, the internal friction is real. The internal friction is not being caused by servers generally. Maybe in the 80s and 90s there was a lot of heat. But nowadays, the technology largely solved, and it's mainly people issues. When I say people issues, we can also turn them to people opportunities. So Bill's framing. If you ever get lost, like, what is design? It starts with the people. So it's complex. Now, when I was trying to figure out key design to WooCommerce, it was really easy because I was watching this like awesome video. Hey, Marina. And I was watching all this, like all of you here, and I could feel you, even on the airplane, that all of you are creating this ecosystem. And it seems maybe like a small thing on some days, but it's a huge thing. It's this room here that's doing that, and that's very special. Now, at the Media Lab, oh, thank you, great to see you here. Great to see you too. Area code 604. Bringing graphic quality and simplicity to the WooCommerce experience will be key to get its deserved wider adoption. Thank you, area code 604. Area code 206. Design is everywhere now. People are aware of it as never before. Is design then now a commodity available everywhere? Indistinguishable sources? Is that a bad thing? I would say technology is the commodity right now. And experience is the thing that is still somewhat rare. So I would flip it that way. Thank you, Erica 206. So I was at the Media Lab for roughly 13 years of my life. And I used to be right next to this person, Hiroshi Ishii. And he's this mysterious man who makes everything fly and flip and do all these things. Kelly, you met him. He just does these things. Like, this is like little hairs, and the hairs vibrate and things move. So he's like, kind of like Q and James Bond, but a little shorter. And I bring him up because, I know we're developers. So I trained at MIT as a computer science person. I somehow went to different fields, like many of you as well. But Hiroshi had this really interesting person that he wanted me to speak with. And it was one of his like star future students. You know, like you have like that sort of Jedi thing in some of these places, and it was the Jedi, and this is my Padawan. But he's not, I may have to get rid of him. Like, he's not gonna make it. Can you talk to him? So I met this young man, and he started showing me his stuff, like, you know, levitating stuff with his hand, you know, the Jedi thing. He showed me this thing. It was like this mechatronic ball with magnets in it, and kind of like it magically sort of got easier to connect or harder to connect. And he showed me this little thing. You sort of push on it, and it pushes back, force feedback-y kind of thing. And then, so Hiroshi, I asked Hiroshi, do you really want me to tell you what I think about this? And he says, yes, please tell him. And I said, do you want me to tell you what I think about this? And he said, yes, please tell me. I said, well, this is something I could build. So what's the point? And it was that moment where the young man began asking, why was he here? Like, what is he saying? Like, why would he say this? But let me hear more. And so I said, I can build this because this is an engineering problem. An engineering problem is to solve something technically difficult. And you've solved this problem really well. This is very small, it's very compact, it generates no heat. It's very interesting. I could probably build it if I wanted to. And so I'm not impressed technically, but most importantly, I'm not impressed emotionally. This is just a technical demonstration. It doesn't do anything for me. And he said to me, well, okay, but how do I get this other part you're talking about? How do I get this other emotional dimension? And so I asked him, well, have you ever been hurt? And he said, no, I'm lucky not never had been in the hospital. But when I was 9 years old, I was in a car accident. And there was some blood, but I was okay. And I said, oh, okay. And he said, and my parents, they broke bones. They both broke bones. And it was a bad accident, but they're okay now. So I asked him, so do you ever talk with your parents about that thing that happened? And he said, no, never talk about it. Do you ever call your mom and dad? I was a little nosy, by the way. And he said, yeah, maybe once a month, maybe, you know? And I said, well, why don't you call your mom and dad and ask them what happened when you were 9 years old? Because when you think about it, like, how did you eat? Like, what did you eat when you after the accident? And he said, well, I ate. Well, did you think about how if you have parents with broken bones, they can't cook that easily for you? And there was this moment of like, oh, wow, there was something happening to my parents. And then he had this kind of realization that he wanted to know more from his parents. He wanted to get that feeling. And so, in many senses, what I was trying to convey to him, that I had to learn the hard way, mind you. I was him in my 20s. I was exactly him, so I know exactly where he was. I knew how to build things, but I didn't know what to build them for because I couldn't find that dimension. So it was a nice moment. And those of you, I having these presentations, all of you have crossed a boundary of realizing that your technology can do one thing, but it can also do a lot of things for a lot of people. And it matters even more when you care about their well-being. And that's a beautiful thing about design. It does that. So again, I used to write software. In the 90s, I would write PostScript code and Lisp code and things like this. But what I did in the 90s is I began to pull them together. I would make things for different companies, clients, and it was a good time to make things for people. But I also felt a little bit sort of empty because making things didn't seem as interesting as making things for people. And so what I did after the 90s was look for things, look for journeys, because journeys are interesting. So who likes to do something difficult? Yeah, okay. It's because you like journeys. For those of you who don't like to do it, it isn't that you don't like to do it, it's probably because you don't want to do it. Because it's usually ouchy. You know what ouchy is? It's painful. But over time you realize that the best moments of learning happen when you ouched, right? It's cognitive dissonance. When something occurs you don't expect occurs, you learn something new. And so I want to tell you a little story about leadership where when I left MIT, I led a university, and I'll never forget how hard it is to run an organization of 100 to an organization of 1,000, because you can't predict what's going to happen, right? Like, there's so many elements, you know? There's so many arrows, too. And I'll never forget how the first thing I had to do was talk to people, but I discovered every time you talk with, so who leads a team? Who leads a team, right? Okay, so when you're leading a team and you're talking in front of people, they're always judging you, right? They're like, oh, I don't know, is it okay? No, not today. It's like, you know, like a 9, 10, 7, 6, 6, right? So after discovering this at scale, I would go to places and do testing. You know, I was doing my own CRO stuff. And so I would go to smaller audiences to see how my messages would test. And so I tested with a group of high school students. And as a new leader, you're never allowed to have a vision, right? It's like rule number 1, don't have a vision. Because if you have a vision, then people will like say, oh, no, that's not my vision. So, but the problem is when you're a new person, everyone asks you, what's your vision? And you're like, man, I can't tell you what my vision is, because, you know, and so it gets really hard. So I tested my visions with this group of students, you know? So they're like high school students, they got t-shirts, they got serious haircuts, it was a little sweaty, it was like, oh my gosh, it was hot, summertime, and I was like, oh, I don't know about this, but let's try this out. So I said, okay, I have like 3 ideas for vision. Can you applaud for the one that makes sense to you, you know? So let's pull it out. And the first one was something like the next generation of art education or something like that. And that got me like dad-style applause. Yeah, Dad, good. And I went, and there's another one, didn't test well. But the one that tested really well was building a justifiable case for creativity in the world, which I didn't thought would like work. But it was like amazing. Like all these sweaty people, they were like clapping and woo! If you know YouTube, it was like a Bono moment. Like, yeah, it's great. Like, what happened? You know, I wasn't sure what happened because I was like, oh, this tested really well. Because when you had that communication, you know, like Maria was saying, I was like an hour later, I was in we had a shop to sell like different art and craft works, and I was talking with this younger woman came up to me and said, I'm really glad you said what you said in there. And I said, what did I say in there? And she said, well, you know, I'm a sophomore in North Dakota, and I'm the creative one, and no one takes me seriously. And you said in there that you would fight for us. And then it all became clear. And from that moment, I just drilled down on that one thing, that if I could do that one thing for people like herself, maybe it would have mattered. And what I realized is that by being at MIT and involved in the startup world and working in an older institution, you have two kinds of organizations. And when you're working with a large organization, it's not a startup, generally speaking. So I call this the startups versus an end-up. You know, an end-up sounds kind of bad, but it's actually kind of good because a startup wants to end up successful in the end. Like a startup can be agile, but an end-up has to be stable, you know? Like a startup has so little to lose, so let's try it out. But an end-up is like, whoa, don't test, don't deploy, bad, right? Where a startup is about empowerment, but end-up is about control. And in many senses, companies need both modes. They're not one is better than the other, depends. But this framework helped me understand how hard it is to lead anything that is an end-up. Because leading a startup it's hard, but it's easier because the friction of change is so less compared to an organization that's larger. Who's ever led a change in a large organization? Right. It's a lot harder. Yeah, there we go. It's a lot harder. And so what I did is I began sort of framing these things, leadership as basically cartoons. This is just one to show you. It was my own therapy. But a leader of an organization that they inherit is there as a bridge to connect the past in the present to the future. And if you think about it, it's kind of like a plank. I know seesaws aren't very safe in 2017, but you know what a seesaw is? It's like a toy like this, right? So if you think about a seesaw has a lot of pressure on that point. I have a science friend, a science education friend, Celtic physics person, and she was saying how the stiletto heel of a women's shoe, that pressure on the ground is equivalent to an elephant's weight. It's so hard. And a seesaw, all the pressure is on that one point. So the leader is often the fulcrum. And the reason why leading hurts is because you feel that fulcrum on you all the time and it just doesn't let up, you know? And your job is to move things to the future. And there's only 3 outcomes. It's a bit morbid. This is a little morbid, so be prepared. So the one leader succeeds. They move the ball to the future. Another leader who doesn't succeed lets the ball roll backwards. You know what that means? It's like, no, we shouldn't do that. Let's go backwards. It's so much better the way it was before. Wow, we made it old way. It's good now. The other way is where a leader just flames out and they lose. And this happens too. People leave companies because they can't do it. And it hurts. It really hurts. It hurts in either way because of that fulcrum. And so what I believe is so important is to recognize that the great thing about the opportunity to lead is that you get to be renewed. You get to come out of that. You get to come out of it and you become a different person. And as a different person, you now can do different kinds of things. And so I look at that as the kind of opportunity that I'm curious about doing anything new. And that's why I was so excited to get to become part of Automatic and look at all the products and services and all the communities that we serve. Now, you have to remember that I was at a college for a long time, and I had these 2 students named Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky. They co-founded this silly idea of renting out your extra room. And it was just like, really, that's never going to catch on. You mean someone's going to rent out their extra room to a stranger? Never going to happen. So anyways, you know, they were students, and they were lovely. And they would always come to campus and say, take the next step. And so I kept envisioning them everywhere on campus. And so what I did is I left that role because I felt it was time to change. And I was invited to go to Silicon Valley, and not the TV show. So, and that's where everything in my own framing changed. Because this idea of going to Silicon Valley was an idea from them. And when I arrived in Silicon Valley, I was working at a venture capital firm, Kleiner Perkins. And it was always so interesting because there was so much money. I mean, like lots of money. People could get their dreams funded. It was like, wow, this actually happens on Earth? This is really interesting. That's actually Al Gore, by the way. I thought it was like CNN. But he said, oh my gosh, this video conferencing in. That was like surreal. So it was an interesting place to hang out. And questions here. Oh my God, thank you. Look at the active people. 971. Wireless, come on, 971. 971. Oh. What is the one thing you would like to see extension developers do differently when it comes to design UX? Well, it depends what kind of extension developer you are. I want to reiterate and be a real broken record that I would like you to be an extension developer that works with your customers and works with them after you've deployed your service, and you keep iterating with them, and don't stay at your desk because you'll never improve it. Thank you, Erico971. Erico949. Thanks for being with us. Do you think AI and machine learning will one day start designing for us? Yes. Either through sampling of trends or use the golden ratio? Everything. When you think about it, by the way, who's afraid of machine learning? I'm afraid some days. Come on. It's okay. It's all right. We're friends, okay? So who thinks machine learning won't get better in the future? Oh, that's good. That's optimistic. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You could be right, though. I bet on you. Everything I see indicates that these systems are just getting superior every year. And they're getting superior in a nonlinear way. What is it, the statistic that speech recognition, error rates were roughly 25%, and then 1 year they dropped to 4%. Suddenly, because of this new model. And am I concerned about it? Not really, because I'd rather be ready for it than be truly, truly petrified by it. I learned this difference between these two words. It's very important to me. Maybe it's helpful to you. There's a word audacity, and there's a word courage. Okay. These two words are very different, it turns out. They sound kind of similar, but they're different. And the way they're different that I learned is that audacity means doing something without any knowledge of what you're getting into. Ever seen like MTV Jackass? You know, it's like, yeah, let's jump off the shopping cart. And like, you know, it's like, what? Yeah, let's do it. Oh, that hurt. Oh, you know, that's audacity, right? Didn't even consider it could hurt. And then there's courage. Courage is different. It means I know what I'm going to go into, and I'm going to take it on. So I like to use a combo platter, mind you. I like to be a little audacious. Okay, let's sort of lean into this. It's going to be okay. Oh, ho, ho, you know. And that's where you have to churn up the courage. But that's how I look at machine intelligence. But all indicators show that it's getting more and more superior. The concern we should all have, though, is that machine intelligence, have any of you been studying biasing in this data? It's the fact that machine intelligence uses data, and people believe that data is rational. But data is us. Like, we leave data. And so the majority of image recognition systems, the majority of rule-based systems to figure out anything involving legal matters, to location information about us, what zip code we live in determines everything about how we might be more successful, not just about how wealthy we are. And those biases are stuck in the system. So you can imagine a machine intelligence system that actually has come online to facilitate court case rulings, which will bias towards people from a certain part of that city, which will tend to create bias towards people who are poorer. Because past history shows that this neighborhood is a dangerous neighborhood versus this neighborhood is a dangerous one. So I have concern about the data, and I think more of us, as we begin to change that, good things will happen. So the reason why I have inclusion in my title is because I want to highlight the importance of doing everything we can to bring in different people into the technology ecosystem. That's not just the software developers, the marketers, it's the data, it's everything we can do to diversify the data that we work with, the customers that we work with, the clients that we work with, is going to improve the outcome, create more fairness versus the unfairness that will likely occur from machine intelligence. That was dark. Let's go back here. Okay, so I'll come back to it because it's a serious thing. Thank you, area code 949. So when I was in venture capital, I could see that technology was increasingly commoditized, but the experience is what mattered. And a superior experience would win the market, and a less superior experience wouldn't win the market. Why is that? So I created a report called the Design and Tech Report. It's in its third year, and the third year has a heavy section on inclusion, mind you. The first one was focused on financial data and basic stats. But the reason why design is important today in computing, why does user experience matter today? I call it the ouch factor. So who had email in the 90s? Email. Yeah, you had email, right? You know, it's like, oh, okay, it's coming. Okay, get my coffee and check email, right? I'm gonna check email. So Eudora or whatever, it's not really good, but that's okay. It's gonna be okay. I'm gonna go back to my world, you know? So the experience could be bad. You'd have an ouch in the morning, right? And then for some reason, you're an overachiever, you come home like, oh, I think I'll check mail again. You know, bad experience, I'll go to sleep, it's okay. So you just had 2 ouches in one day, super tolerable, right? But what's happened because of mobile phones is that because you're checking all the time, if you checked it all the time and it was ouch all the time, it'd be ouch all day long. So it's just a fact that we're in such close contact to the experience that proportionally speaking, the old way of making experiences doesn't work as well because we're assuming that the interaction is light versus all the time. And if you look at all the successful companies today, many of them were advantaged by starting after 2008 because that's after the mobile phone took off. And all companies that were started before that were generally disadvantaged because they lived in a desktop world. So that challenge exists today, exists in our ecosystem as well. And that's why we are working to figure out how to jump ahead in spite of our legacy. Questions? Okay. Ooh. This is a very active audience. Okay, oh, there we go, all right. Oh, controversy, good. Oh, political. Terra Erico 206, that's where I'm from, Seattle. Hi, John, great talk, but leadership is not democracy. How do you get people to buy into a vision you have conviction on, but which is unpopular? You can't always go with the message that tests best, because then you'd be a mere politician, not a leader. Okay, we have 10 minutes, 30 seconds. Who wants to answer this question? Go ahead. There it is. Well, let's see here. I I'm a big believer that leadership is much easier when you understand what you can see written everywhere, but now I feel very strongly, when you understand shared purpose. If you understand shared purpose, then things begin to move quicker. What does shared purpose mean? It means having that common thing that we all generally tend to agree on. If we can get to that resonant frequency, people start to listen. Let's say you're a leader and you've sort of shown up, like you got off, stepped out of a Cadillac is no longer good anymore, BMW or something, 7 Series, right? Like, who is this person? They're not one of us, and they don't feel like us, they don't know us, and so immediately you want to push back. But if it's a leader that can come in, wants to understand, wants to listen, that leader is trying to find the frequency at which everyone is operating. And once that frequency, I see you nodding, you've done that before. You find the frequency, you lock into it, and you do your best to ensure that you don't just start from where you're at. You bring the DNA and you mix it, and you fail. I think that's a very important factor that's often missing in these leadership books. Like, go ahead, take the 6 whatever, do the triangle. There's 8 things here. Do the 2 of the 8, and you just have to fail. But you'll fail less often, frequency-wise, if you can find the frequency of the shared purpose, and if you personally are passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about it, everyone's going to figure this out. It's interesting because, like, just when I arrived here, I remembered this video with my mom, and I was over there, but I was like, popped it in because I realized, wait, I'm in Seattle, and that's my mom, and like, I'm gonna see my mom tonight, and people asking why I care about this ecosystem so much. It's because it's how I emerged from essentially that lower middle class, this ability to earn in spite of all the odds that push against you. And so I believe this work that we're doing collectively has great meaning because it brings earning to people who may not be able to get that job that others can get, who have a greater college degree or whatever better advantage. So I believe in that. Okay, so when you think about design and when it matters, an example that I like to use is cars. So, cars? Not so much anymore. Younger people don't have cars anymore. But anyways, like there were these things that people would buy, cars. And people would buy cars, and then around after World War II, people stopped buying cars. So GM was kind of like in a little trouble. So for GM to increase the number of cars, what it did was it brought in the first design lead of GM. His name was Harley Earl. And what did he do? Well, he added fins to the back of the car because they couldn't make the car faster, so he could make the car look faster. And give chrome, because chrome is shiny. Ooh, shiny. This is the real shiny object, thing. And but that's not the reason why GM sales took off. What's interesting is that an ecosystem shift occurred. What occurred is that in the 1950s, in the United States, the interstate highway system was put in. So suddenly, you didn't drive your car short distances. You could drive longer distances. And a car began to define who you are. It became a lifestyle thing. And so a car became desirable for a whole different reason. And that's what triggered it. And so that's why after studying this work, I began understanding that you have to look for the ecosystem change. And the ecosystem change, I believe, in this e-commerce system is happening. And how it's happening is that we're now being a little bit skeptical of how things operate. And so we're looking for more independence. So in the independence, I feel opportunity. Okay, 206. Oh, 206 again. Well, you asked 2 questions. Okay, I'll get that one, Devin. Gave his name. That's good. 801. As technology makes building websites easier for the non-technical, what value and role from current web developers will persist and remain relevant? Oh. Area code 801. P.S. Machine learning is how we get Skynet. LOL. Well, that's where I've thought about this a lot, actually, quite seriously. I believe that this room is I guess I would call it the counter movement to being able to ensure that people can control their own destiny outside of the completely machine intelligence controlled cloud systems. And I think it's actually quite a noble thing to do because people are depending upon us to keep this thing going. So I do believe that in the future, more and more of this stuff is going to happen. More and more stuff is going to be automated. But at the end of the day, we will still prefer to work with people. So I've just loved watching this conference from afar and these wonderful MCs. So I'd rather hang out here than with the computers. So I think we're okay for at least 5 more years. 206. What can people in this room do to help WordPress be more inclusive? Ooh, 206 name, his first name is Devin. Well, inclusive is an interesting word, right? It's like, what does that mean, being inclusive? Does it mean being inclusive in this way or that way or that way? It's a very interesting word as I began to study it. You can definitely ask a question about who is not there around you. That's a very simple question to ask. And then go out of your way to invite someone in. I tend to do this a lot nowadays. The reason why is because the ideas get more interesting. Just for that rational view. Someone said to me, why are you so rational? Like it's an emotional reason, right? I said, no, it's a very rational reason. Because the more different types of people you bring to the table, the more randomness occurs. And so it's just very practical. I want to reiterate the importance of being very pragmatic about inclusion. Because in reality, inclusion is quite rational. Because you need to have different kind of people around you. Otherwise, you're going to build the same thing for that same person that actually is smaller than your VC world, word total addressable market. So if you want to grow your TAM, you have to know people outside your TAM. And so it's just very rational. And so if you ever ask, like, why aren't our stats growing? It's because we don't fully understand that group of people. Maybe we have to engage them and involve them. So, very rational thing. Thank you, Erica 206. Okay, all right. Oh, 206, another one. Hi, John. Great talk, but leadership is not democracy. How do you get people to buy into a vision you have conviction on, but which is unpopular? You can't always go with the message that tests best, because then you'd be a mere politician, not a leader. Jasper. Oh, Jasper, you're dropping the 206 style thing. I think that, the fallacy, so who's a leader here? Who's a leader? Leader, we lead people, right? And did anyone ever tell you that leading people is easy? Did anyone tell you it was going to hurt? No one told you it was going to hurt, right? And you were tricked. Because leading is painful. It's that you're that seesaw. You're the fulcrum. You feel the pressure on you all the time. Everyone is depending upon you. And the question is that something I can withstand, number one? And number two, why doesn't everyone listen to me? I'm right. Of course they should move. I would say that the thing that I've learned about leadership, really the hard way, I'm not sure if you looked me up, I was voted no confidence by the entire faculty of my institution, which is basically game over. But I'm also one of the 0.1% of presidents that survived. How did I do that? People always ask me. Because people don't survive those kinds of things that come at you. It was actually very simple. It was very hard because I had to adopt a view of the world that is irrational, more about people. Because have you noticed that people aren't rational? Maybe you've noticed that, those of you who lead people. It's like, wait, I thought you were like, whoa, where'd that come from? And so as a leader, the thing that I learned through different difficult failures is that in reality, the leader's goal is only one thing. The goal is to figure out how to move from point A to point B. And the good doobie leader, like who wants to be a good doobie? Come on, good doobie leader. Come on, good doobie leader. Good doobie leader. Come on, yeah, you know, get this good doobie leader is like, if I do the right thing, it's going to be okay. It doesn't work that way. And so you have to adopt a framing where you realize that it really isn't about you. It's about the system and where the system can move and where it can't move. And once you come in tune with that, you begin to realize that everyone wants to produce a very simple story about you. And that story is as simple as possible. And you have to learn that simple story about you to overcome. And I will say that being a leader is a great thing. So those of you who are choosing to lead, keep doing it. If you're a creative person, it's irrational to lead. Did you notice that? It's like, I love making my stuff. I don't want to lead people. I love making my stuff. But in reality, leading organizations is one of the most fun things you can get to do if you're lucky to get to do. So I encourage you to recognize the fact that it's not easy. You fail all the time, but sometimes you win. 1 minute, 35 seconds left. Okay, let's see here. Okay, where do I go here? I can't fast forward because I have my computer here. Any more questions over here? No. Oh, not good. Oh, what's that? What can the people in this room do to help WordPress be more inclusive? Invite people that are unlike you to these kinds of things. Pay for their ticket if you can. You'll find one thing that I found is that the conversation gets more interesting. When I arrived in Silicon Valley, I discovered that all the dinners I attended tend to be indexed high towards men. I'm a guy. I'm okay with that. I'm a guy. I have nothing wrong with guys. But I began realizing that, wow, let me just consciously decide how to invite more people, different kinds of people. After I did that, everyone would come up to me and say, wow, this is a much more interesting event. You just saw the difference. And so consciously doing that is a good idea. It's just practical. Again, practical. Okay. All right. Let's see here. 2 minutes, 43 seconds. All right, let's go here. Is that an important example? No, I can't. I love having a computer in front of me. So I can't. Can you open this date? Can you open your computer? We'll do like a Minority Report. Can you open the computer? It's okay, people can see what's, they know it's a computer. Can you show the Keynote file? I'm using my hands to gesture. I'm using gesture interface. Can you open the Keynote? Oh yeah, oh yes, okay. Now scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, scroll, scroll to pages, thank you. Pages, more scroll. Like, oh good, more scroll. I was going to say one more thing. More scroll. There we go. Thank you. We're going. That's good. Okay. Let's go one up. Yeah. Let's go one up. That's good. Perfect. All right. Okay. Press play, please. Gesture interface. All right. What happened? There we go. This is, if you haven't seen it, it's interesting when you install WordPress. This is an old screen cap, but I loved how there's this tab called Freedoms. Have you noticed it? There's a Freedoms tab. What's new? Credits, Freedoms. And I thought it was interesting that this ecosystem we're in is all about freedom, and that's super inspiring, right? It's like people say, like, really, it's there, and so I've been thinking about freedom. And there was this experiment. This has been waiting for 4 months to come to you. This has been waiting in the oven for so long. It's pretty cool. began wondering, how do we incorporate this message of freedom? Because that's what we're creating for people through this ecosystem. It's a very special thing we're all doing together. We're making commerce accessible to so many people who could normally access it. And so Marina over here developed the copy, and Ryan Ray did the video animation. Very nice. And so we're going to give it the first debut of this video. Okay, let's go. Here it goes. I have curtains as well. It's still very Hollywood. It's a sketch, mind you. Sketch. Ryan, where are you? It's so good. So anyways, in summary, I believe we feel like that as an ecosystem, and we mean that to people out there. And so I'm encouraged to get to work in this ecosystem. I'll do what I can, and if I'm ever doing poorly, please email me or DM me. Thank you.